Are you really going to make your own grandchildren homeless over a piece of paper? My daughter-in-law's voice echoed through my quiet kitchen. The kitchen I had paid for with 32 years of hard work. I did not argue. I did not cry. Instead, I walked to my desk, picked up the phone, and cancelled every single recurring transfer to my son's bank account. Over $72,000 had flowed out of my savings over the years, and it was stopping today. Then, I drove downtown to meet my lawyer and removed his name from my estate entirely. Now, the house they were so sure would be theirs is a fortress they cannot enter. The money they took for granted is gone, and the silence between us is deafening. Before we continue with the rest of this journey, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose your own peace over the demands of your family? Please, share your experience in the comments below. Note, while this story is crafted for narrative impact, the lessons on setting boundaries and remembering your own worth are very real and important. The white colonial on Willow Creek Road has stood for 40 years. To a stranger passing by, it is just a house. It has forest green shutters, a wide wraparound porch, and a roof that has weathered 100 Ohio storms. But to me, it is not just wood and brick. It is a living record of a life. It is the silent witness to 32 years of my marriage and every single day of my son's childhood. George and I bought this house when our son, David, was only 2 years old. I remember the day we signed the papers. We were young, we were tired, and we were very, very broke. We worked so hard to keep this roof over our heads. I spent my days standing in front of high school teenagers, teaching them the beauty of a well-placed comma and the power of a poem. George worked long hours in sales, coming home with worn-out shoes and a tired smile. We sacrificed, we saved, and 11 years ago, we finally paid the mortgage in full. That was our victory. It was a quiet, honest victory. Then, 4 years ago, the house changed. George passed away. Suddenly, the hallways felt longer. The kitchen felt colder. The grief was a heavy blanket that I could not shake off. I retired from teaching because the weight of the loss was too much to carry while trying to grade essays. For a long time, the house felt empty. My son started calling it all that space. He said it as if the house were a void, as if it were a vacuum waiting to be filled by someone younger. Someone is more active, but I did not see it that way. I began to reclaim the house, room by room. I took the third bedroom, the one that used to be a guest room for people who rarely visited, and I transformed it. I painted the walls a soft, creamy white. I moved my mahogany desk near the window. I lined the walls with my books. Hundreds of them. Books arranged by subject, and then by how they made me feel. I call it my reading room. That room saved my life. Every morning, I sit there with a cup of hot coffee. I watch the sun hit the green shutters George painted just months before he died. I can still see him on the ladder, being so careful with the edges. The room smells of old paper, leather, and the faint scent of the vanilla candles I like to burn. In that room, I learned to be Martha again. Not just George's wife, not just David's mother, but Martha. I fought for this silence. I worked 32 years for this peace. It is a quiet that I earned with every lesson plan and every mortgage payment. My son looks at my home and sees a resource. He sees square footage. But when I walk through these doors, I feel the heartbeat of 40 years. I feel the warmth of the wood. This is not just a house. It is my sanctuary. And it is finally, truly, mine. It was a Wednesday afternoon in the middle of February. In Ohio, February is a grey month. The sky looks like wet wool, and the wind has a way of whistling through the cracks of even the sturdiest homes. I was where I usually was at that time of day. I was in my reading room. I had a cup of chamomile tea and a worn copy of a novel I had taught to my seniors for 20 years. The house was quiet. It was a good kind of quiet. It was the kind of silence that feels like a soft sweater you have owned for a long time. Then, the phone rang. The caller ID showed my son's name. David. I felt that little spark of warmth that every mother feels when her child reaches out. I answered with a smile in my voice. We talked for a few minutes about nothing in particular. He asked about my garden, though he knows nothing grows in February. I asked about his job in sales. We moved through the usual rhythm of a mother-son conversation. But then, the rhythm changed. I have known David for 43 years. I know his happy voice. I know his tired voice. And I certainly know his asking voice. It is a specific tone. It is a little too soft. It is a little too careful. It sounds like he is walking on thin ice and trying not to let it crack. "Mom," he said. He paused. "Samantha and I have been talking. You know our mortgage? Well, we had to refinance recently. The new interest rates. They are not what we expected. The new payment is a lot more than we can handle right now. We are stretched thin, Mom. Really thin." I felt a pang of worry in my chest. I have lived through recessions. I have lived through seasons of lean bank accounts. I told him I was sorry. I asked if they were okay. And then came the offer. "We were thinking," David said, his voice dropping into that gentle, persuasive tone. "What if we moved in with you for a while? Just for 6 months. Maybe 8. Just until we get back on our feet. You have all that space, Mom. All that space. All that space." Those words hit me like a physical weight. My home was not empty to me. Every square inch of this house was filled with memories of George. It was filled with the silence I had fought so hard to find after the funeral. My reading room was not just a spare bedroom. It was the place where I had finally stopped shaking. It was my sanctuary. I did not answer right away. I looked at the bookshelves. I looked at the armchair where George used to sit and read the Sunday paper. David continued. He knew my silence meant I was hesitating. So, he did what he always does when he wants a yes. He brought up the grandchildren. "Lily asks about you every day," he said. "She misses her Grandma Martha. And Noah. He is getting so big. He needs his grandma. Imagine how much fun it would be for them to play in that big backyard of yours every day. It would be a dream come true for them." He was using my heart against me. He was painting a picture of a happy, crowded home. He was making it sound like a gift he was giving to me, rather than a favor he was asking for himself. He was counting on my guilt. He was counting on the fact that I am a grandmother who loves her grandbabies more than life itself. I told him I needed to think about it. I told him we needed to sit down and talk about what that would actually look like. He sounded relieved. He told me he loved me. He hung up. But as I sat there in the fading grey light of the afternoon, I did not feel loved. I felt hunted. I looked around my quiet, beautiful room. I realized that to my son, my peace was just space. It was a resource to be used. It was a vacancy to be filled. I stayed in that chair for a long time. The tea grew cold. The sun went down. And for the first time in 4 years, my house felt like it was no longer mine. The following Saturday was one of those winter days where the air feels like ice water. I had spent the morning preparing. I am a retired teacher. I do not go into important meetings without a plan. I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. I wrote down what I needed. I wrote down my boundaries. I knew that if I was going to give up my solitude, I needed to protect my soul. They arrived at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The house was suddenly full of noise. Lily and Noah ran through the front door, their winter coats dripping melted snow on the hardwood floors. They were shouting. They were excited. I hugged them. I smelled their sweet, cold cheeks. I loved them so much it hurt. But as they ran into the backyard to play with a stick they found, I saw the look on Samantha's face. My daughter-in-law did not look like someone who was grateful for a place to stay. She looked like someone who was conducting an inspection. She looked at my curtains. She looked at my old-fashioned wallpaper. She looked at the kitchen counters. We sat down at the table. I poured the coffee. The steam rose between us, but it did not feel warm. "I have thought about your proposal," I began. I kept my voice steady. "And I am open to it. But for this to work, we need to be very clear. This house is my home. It is not a hotel. David nodded quickly. He wanted the yes. Samantha remained silent. Her eyes were hard. First, I said, I will need you to cover your share of the utilities and the groceries. I have calculated the costs. It comes to $800 a month. That is far below market rate. But it will ensure I am not losing my retirement savings to cover your bills. The silence that followed was heavy. Samantha set her coffee cup down with a sharp clack against the wood. Second, I continued, my reading room remains my room. It is off limits to everyone. It is my private space. Third, I want a written agreement. We need a timeline. 6 months is 6 months. We all sign it. And finally, we need house rules. Quiet hours after 9 o'clock. No exceptions. Samantha laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It was a short, bitter sound. Are you serious, Martha? She asked. You want your own son to pay you $800 a month? You want us to sign a contract? We are family, not tenants. I looked at her. Family respects each other's boundaries, Samantha. I am giving you my privacy. I am giving you my peace. I am asking for clarity in return. You are treating this like a business transaction, David whispered. He looked ashamed. He would not look me in the eye. Mom, we are in trouble. We are drowning. And you are worried about the 9 o'clock quiet hours? I am worried about my sanity, David, I replied. Through the kitchen window, I could see the children. Lily was chasing Noah. They were laughing. They had no idea that their parents were trying to guilt their grandmother into surrender. They were innocent. They were pure joy. And then Samantha leaned forward. Her voice went flat. It went cold. You are really something, Martha, she said. You have all this money. You have this big house all to yourself. And you are really going to make your own grandchildren homeless over $800 and a piece of paper? Is that who you are? The room went still. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. I looked at David. I waited for him to defend me. I waited for him to say, No, Samantha. Mom is being fair. He said nothing. He stared at the table. In that moment, the storm outside the house was nothing compared to the storm inside. I realized that they didn't want a home. They wanted a takeover. They saw my kindness as a weakness. They saw my house as their inheritance that I was simply occupying until I died. No one is making anyone homeless, I said, my voice as cold as the February wind. You have a choice. These are my terms. If you do not like them, you are free to find another solution. Samantha stood up. She did not say goodbye. She walked to the back door and barked at the children to get in the car. David stood up slowly. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the little boy I used to tuck in at night. But then, he turned and followed his wife. The door slammed. I sat alone at the table. The 3 coffee cups were still there. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was a hollow, aching silence. I looked out at the backyard where the children had been playing just minutes before. They were gone. And I knew, deep in my bones, that the sweet offer had been a trap. And because I had refused to walk into it, I was now the villain in their story. The house was too quiet after they left. It was not the peaceful quiet I had worked so hard to achieve. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at the half-finished bowl of tomato soup. It had grown cold. A thin skin had formed on the top. I did not have the energy to get up and pour it down the drain. I just sat there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. My phone buzzed on the wooden table. The sound was sharp. It made me jump. I picked it up, hoping it was David calling to apologize, hoping he had realized how cruel Samantha had been. But it was not a call. It was a text message. Mom, the message began. Samantha and I need some time to process what happened today. Please do not come by the house for now. The kids have a lot going on right now, and we do not want them to be confused by adult conflict. We need some space. I read it once, then I read it again. Each word felt like a deliberate slap to my face. The kids have a lot going on. That was the line that hurt the most. Lily was 7 years old. Noah was 4. What they had going on was school, play dates, and wanting to see their grandma. They were not confused by adult conflict. They were being used. They were being turned into a shield. They were being turned into a punishment. I set the phone face down. I could not look at the screen anymore. I felt a coldness in my chest that had nothing to do with the February weather. I was being told that my love for my grandchildren was a privilege that could be revoked if I did not follow orders. I was being told that if I asked for respect, I would lose my family. I did not sleep that night. I walked through the house like a ghost. I ended up in the nursery we had set up for the kids years ago. I sat on the edge of the small bed and remembered the first month of Noah's life. David and Samantha were overwhelmed. They were exhausted. I was at their house every single day. I cooked. I cleaned. I held that baby for hours so they could sleep. I remembered the moment Noah finally spoke. He was sitting on my lap, pulling at my necklace. He looked up at me with those big, curious eyes and said, "Dada." He was so young that he did not know the difference. He saw me so often, he thought I was the other half of his world. I had laughed then. I had felt so much joy. And now? Now, that same child was being kept from me because I had asked for $800 to cover his parents' electricity. I realized then that this was not about the money. It was about control. Samantha wanted me to know that she held the keys to my heart. She wanted me to know that she could shut the door whenever she pleased. And David, my own son, was letting her do it. He was standing by and watching his mother be erased. I felt a sudden, sharp anger. It was a teacher's anger. The kind of anger you feel when you see a bully taking something that does not belong to them. For years, I had been patient. I had been too tired to fight. I had been too willing to look away. I had told myself that Samantha was just stressed. I had told myself that David was just busy. But as the sun began to rise over Willow Creek Road, I saw the truth. I was being punished for being honest. I was being punished for having a backbone. And as I looked at the cold, empty bowl of soup still sitting on my table, I knew that I could no longer be the woman who stayed silent. I was 67 years old. I had earned the right to speak, and I was done being a victim of their adult conflict. The morning after the text message, I did not go to my reading room. I went to George's old mahogany desk in the den. It is a heavy piece of furniture. It smells of old ink and cedar. I sat in his chair. I still call it George's chair. And I pulled out a thick blue folder from the bottom drawer. I am a woman of records. I spent 32 years keeping track of grades, attendance, and lesson plans. I do not throw things away. Inside this folder was the history of my help over the last 7 years. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and a pen. I began to write. I did not do it with anger. I did it with a strange, cold clarity. I needed to see the numbers. I needed to see the truth in black and white. I started with the big one. 7 years ago, when David and Samantha were buying their house, they were 2 weeks away from losing the purchase agreement because they did not have enough for the down payment. George and I did not hesitate. I found the record. $25,000. We gave it to them as a gift. We told them it was their start. I moved to the next page. 4 years ago, the medical bills after Noah was born. It was a difficult birth. There were complications. David called me, sounding so small and so scared. I wrote a check for $8,500. I told him not to worry about it. I told him his only job was to take care of his wife and son. Then there was the roof. 2 years ago, they leaked, and their insurance had a high deductible. They said they could not afford the $5,000 to fix it. I paid it. I looked through the smaller transfers. $200 here, $500 there. Just until next month, David would say. I looked at the tuition for Lily's preschool. I had paid for 2 full years because David said the public school was not good enough and they were short on cash. That was another $12,000. I sat back and looked at the list. My hand was shaking slightly. I took my calculator and added it all up. The total was $72,400. 72,000. I sat in the silence of the room and let that number sink in. I had given my son and his wife the equivalent of a college education. I had funded their lifestyle. I had fixed their roof. I had educated their children. And I had done it all without ever asking for a single dollar back. I had done it because I thought that was what love looked like. But then, I asked myself a question I had never dared to ask before. Who gives to Martha? The answer was not my son. The answer was not my daughter-in-law. I thought about my neighbor, Frank. Frank is 70 years old. He knew George for 40 years. Every time it snows, Frank clears my driveway before I even wake up. He does not ask for money. He does not ask for a thank you. He just does it. When I had the flu last winter, Frank left a container of hot chicken soup on my porch every single day. I thought about my niece, Sarah, in Portland. Sarah is 30 years old. She is busy. She has a career. But every Sunday evening at exactly 6 o'clock, my phone rings. It is Sarah. She asks about my books. She asks about George's photographs. She remembers me. The people I had been funding for 7 years were the ones who were now calling me difficult. They were the ones who were using my grandchildren as a weapon. They were the ones who saw my house as empty space instead of a home. I looked at the handwritten list one last time. I realized that David and Samantha did not see me as a mother or a grandmother. They saw me as a resource. I was an account to be drawn from. I was a safety net. I was a convenience. I closed the blue folder. I felt a strange sense of peace. The guilt that had been eating at me for 24 hours began to evaporate. I realized that I had already paid my dues. I had already been more than generous. I was not the one who was being difficult. I was the one who was finally waking up. I stood up from George's chair and walked to the window. The snow was falling lightly on Willow Creek Road. I looked at the green shutters and the wide porch. I am not a resource, I whispered to the empty room. I am a person, and it was time I started acting like one. I picked up the phone. I did not call David. I called my lawyer, Catherine Miller. It was time to make some changes. 3 days after that cold text message from my son, I went out to the mailbox. It was a crisp, clear morning on Willow Creek Road. The frost was still clinging to the dead grass, sparkling like crushed diamonds under the winter sun. I was standing there, leafing through a catalogue, when my neighbor, Frank, pulled up in his old truck. Frank has lived 2 doors down for 40 years. He and George used to spend hours leaning over the fence, talking about lawnmowers and local politics. Frank is a good man. He is the kind of neighbor who knows everything that happens on the street, but he is never a gossip. "Good morning, Martha," Frank said. He leaned out of his window, looking a bit hesitant. He stayed in his truck, the engine idling with a low, rhythmic rumble. "I have been meaning to tell you something. I do not want to stick my nose where it does not belong, but I thought you should know." I closed my mailbox. "What is it, Frank?" "Well," he began, rubbing his chin. "Your son, David. He was over here last week. He was talking to the Garfields down the block. You know they are thinking about moving to Florida soon. Anyway, David told them that you were planning to downsize. He told them the house would be staying in the family and that he would be moving in sooner rather than later." I felt the blood drain from my face. I gripped the edge of the mailbox until my knuckles turned white. "Downsize?" I repeated. The word felt like ash in my mouth. "That is what he said." Frank nodded, his voice gentle. "He said you were getting tired of the maintenance. He said you wanted something smaller, and that he was going to take over the property to keep George's legacy alive. Martha, is that true?" I looked at Frank, and for a moment I could not speak. The betrayal was a physical weight. David had been telling the neighborhood my house was his. He had been marketing my home as if I were already gone. He was not waiting for me to say yes. He was simply waiting for me to get out of the way. "No, Frank," I said, my voice trembling with a new kind of strength. "It is not true. I am not going anywhere. I walked back into my house and shut the door. I stood in the hallway and looked at the stairs. I remembered David as a toddler, sliding down those steps on his stomach. I remembered George holding the railing during his final months. This house was my life, and my son was treating it like a piece of fruit he was waiting to fall from a tree. I went straight to my desk. I found the business card for Catherine Miller. I had known Catherine for a long time. She is sharp. She is direct. She is the kind of woman who does not waste time with small talk. I called her office, and her secretary told me she could see me the next morning at 10 o'clock. The next morning, I did something I had not done in a long time. I went to my closet and pulled out my best coat. It is a long, navy blue wool coat with silver buttons. George had bought it for me for our 30th anniversary. When I put it on, I felt a change. I did not feel like a lonely goer-for. I did not feel like a difficult mother. I felt like Martha. I felt like a woman who had taught 32 years of students. I felt like a woman who owned her own life. I drove downtown to the brick building where Catherine's office is located. When I walked in, I sat up straight. I did not apologize for being there. "Catherine," I said when I sat down across from her, "I need to make some changes. My son is currently my primary beneficiary and my power of attorney. I want to change that." Immediately, Catherine looked at me over her glasses. "Is everything all right, Martha?" "Everything is clear now," I told her. "I want to name my niece, Sarah, as my primary beneficiary. And I want to create a formal record of every dollar I have given my son over the last 7 years. I want it documented that his inheritance has already been paid out in cash. If he wants this house, he can buy it from Sarah after I am gone. But he will not get it for free. Not after this." Catherine nodded and began to type. As I watched her, I felt a lightness in my chest. I was taking back the keys. I was setting a boundary that no one could cross. I walked out of that office into the cold February air, and for the first time in weeks, I breathed deeply. I was Martha, and I was back in charge. Life has a way of throwing a curveball just when you think you have everything figured out. For nearly 3 weeks, there was total silence from David and Samantha. I had stopped the recurring bank transfers. I had changed my will. I had reclaimed my house. But the silence from my grandchildren was a dull ache that followed me from room to room. Then, on a Tuesday morning, my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize. "Hello? Is this Martha?" a woman's voice asked. She sounded professional, but there was a note of worry in her tone. "Yes, this is she." "Martha, this is Mrs. Patterson. I am Lily's second-grade teacher at Maple Creek Elementary. I am so sorry to call you out of the blue, but I have Lily here in the office. She has been very upset this morning, and she became quite insistent that I call her grandmother." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Is she hurt? Is she okay?" "She is safe," Mrs. Patterson said softly, "but she is very distressed. I tried to reach both of her parents first, but neither one answered their phones. I saw your name on the emergency contact list from last year, and I decided to take a chance. I am on my way," I said. I did not even check the stove. I grabbed my keys and my navy blue coat and was out the door in seconds. When I walked into the school office, I saw her. Lily was sitting in a large wooden chair that made her look even smaller than she was. Her backpack was in her lap, and her face was blotchy from crying. When she saw me, she did not wait. She scrambled out of the chair and ran across the linoleum floor. I caught her and held her tight. I could feel her little heart racing. I smoothed her hair and whispered that everything was okay. I signed the paperwork to take her home, and Mrs. Patterson walked us to the car. "Thank you for coming, Martha," the teacher said quietly. "Lily told me that you were the only one who knew how to make things feel okay again." We sat in my car in the school parking lot. I did not start the engine yet. I just let Lily breathe. Finally, she looked at me with those eyes that looked so much like George's. "Ba-oi," she whispered. "Why don't you come to our house anymore? Did I do something bad?" My heart broke into 1,000 pieces. I took her small hand in mine. Oh, sweetheart. No, you never, ever did anything bad. Beau, Mare, and Bar just had a disagreement. Sometimes grown-ups have a hard time talking to each other. It has nothing to do with how much we love you. Lily wiped her nose with her sleeve. Beau said you were being difficult. He said you were being mean about the house. I stayed calm. I remembered what Catherine had told me about being honest. Do you think I am mean, Lily? She thought about it for a long time. No, she said. I think you are honest. Mrs. Patterson says being honest is better than being easy. She says easy people just say what people want to hear, but honest people tell the truth. I looked at my granddaughter and felt a surge of pride. Mrs. Patterson is a very smart woman, I said. We went back to my house on Willow Creek Road. I did not take her back to her parents' house yet. I knew they were probably in meetings, but they had not answered the school. That was their failure, not mine. I took Lily into the kitchen. I did the only thing I knew how to do when the world felt upside down. I made grilled cheese and tomato soup. It is the ultimate American comfort food. I stood at the stove buttering the bread, listening to the sizzle of the pan. Lily sat at the table, her feet swinging back and forth. We sat there and ate in the quiet. No television, no phones, just the sound of spoons against ceramic bowls. It was a simple meal, but it felt like a feast. It was the kind of peace that money cannot buy. It was the kind of connection that can only happen when you choose to be present. I miss you, Bar, Lily said, her mouth full of grilled cheese. I miss you too, every single day, I told her. An hour later, my phone rang. It was David. His voice was frantic. Martha? I just saw a missed call from the school. They said you picked up Lily? Why didn't they call me? They did call you, David, I said, my voice as steady as a rock. And they called Samantha. Neither of you answered. Your daughter was in distress. So I stepped in. She is here with me. She is safe. She has been fed. There was a long silence on the other end. I was in a meeting, he stammered. I will come get her. Come at 6 o'clock, I said. She is going to take a nap now. And, David, come alone. We need to have a real conversation. Just you and me. I hung up before he could argue. I looked at Lily, who had fallen asleep on the sofa with a blanket tucked around her. I felt a sense of clarity I had never known. My son had lost his way. He had forgotten that a mother is a person, not a bank. And today, because of a grilled cheese sandwich and a brave little girl, I was going to remind him. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked towards 6 o'clock in the evening. Outside, the Ohio sky was turning a deep, bruised purple. The streetlights on Willow Creek Road flickered to life, casting long shadows across the snow. Inside, the house was warm. My granddaughter, Lily, was still asleep on the sofa, her breathing deep and even. I sat at my kitchen table, the same wooden table where my husband, George, and I had shared thousands of meals. I waited. At exactly 6 o'clock, a car pulled into the driveway. I heard the engine cut out. I heard the car door heavy thud as it closed. A moment later, there was a knock at the door. It was not the loud, confident knock of a man who owned the place. It was hesitant. It was quiet. I opened the door. David stood there, looking tired. His tie was loosened, and his eyes were rimmed with red. He looked like the 43-year-old man he was, but also like the small boy who used to hide behind my legs when he was scared. I stepped back and let him in without a word. She is in the living room, I whispered, pointing toward the sofa. David went to her. He stood over his daughter for a long time, just watching her sleep. I saw his shoulders drop. I saw him swallow hard. He stayed there for a full minute before turning back to me. We walked into the kitchen and sat down. Mom, he began. His voice was cracked. I owe you an apology. A real one. I did not interrupt. I did not make it easy for him. I waited for him to find the words. What Samantha said about the kids being homeless. It was wrong. he said, looking at his hands. It was a lie, told out of anger, and I should have stopped her. I should have stood up and said that you have been nothing but generous for 7 years. But I stayed silent. I am so sorry for that. I looked at my son. I looked at the man I had raised. You stayed silent because it was easier, I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice I used when a student was being dishonest in my classroom. You stayed silent because you were following her lead, just like you have been doing for a long time. He flinched. I continued. And then there is the matter of what you told the neighbors, I said. Frank told me you were telling people I wanted to downsize, that you were already planning your move into my house before you even asked me. You were treating my life like a formality, David. You were waiting for me to disappear so you could take what you thought was yours. David put his face in his hands. We were stressed, Mom. The refinancing, the bills. We were just so sure you would say yes. I started living in a future that had not happened yet. I am ashamed of that. I leaned forward. I wanted him to hear every word. David, listen to me. I love you. I love those grandchildren with everything I have. But I need you to understand something very important. I am not a resource. I am not a bank account. I am not a safety net that you can just fall into whenever you make a mistake. I paused, letting the silence fill the room. I am Martha, I said. I am 67 years old. I am a woman who taught for 32 years. I am a woman who lost her husband and had to learn how to breathe again in the quiet of this house. I am a person, and a person has boundaries. I know, Mom, he whispered. I do not think you did know, I replied. But you will now. I have stopped all the transfers. The money I have given you over the years, that $72,000. That was your inheritance. It is gone. I have changed my will. Catherine has all the documents. This house is mine. It will stay mine until the day I am gone. And when that day comes, it will go to Sarah. David looked up, shocked. Sarah? Yes, I said. Because Sarah calls me because she wants to hear my voice. Not because she needs a check. She sees me as a person. I need you to start doing the same. The room was silent for a long time. I expected him to get angry. I expected him to shout about fairness or family loyalty. But he didn't. He just sat there, looking at the table. Finally, he stood up. He walked around the table and stood next to my chair. He reached out and hugged me. It was not a quick, polite hug. It was a real one. He held on to me like he was trying to find his way back home. He did not ask for money. He did not ask me to change my mind about the will. He just held me and whispered, I'm so sorry, Mom. I forgot who you were. I'm so sorry. I felt my own eyes grow wet. I hugged him back. But I did not let go of my resolve. I had established a new order. I had drawn a line in the sand. We can start over, I told him as we pulled apart. But it has to be different. No more expectations. No more treating my home like a backup plan. If you want to come over for coffee. Come over because you want to see your mother. But leave the bills at your own house. He nodded. He understood. Lily woke up then, rubbing her eyes and calling for her dad. David went to her, picked her up, and gathered her things. He thanked me again at the door. As I watched his taillights disappear down Willow Creek Road, I felt a strange, beautiful lightness. I walked back into the kitchen. I washed the 2 coffee cups. I wiped down the table. I went into my reading room and sat in my chair. The house was quiet again. It was my quiet. I was not a convenience. I was not a soft place for someone else's crisis to land. I was Martha. I was home. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The house on Willow Creek Road was dark now, except for a single warm lamp shining in the front hallway. I poured myself a glass of red wine and walked out onto the wraparound porch. Even though it was a cold February night in Ohio, I needed to feel the air. I sat in the old wicker chair and looked up. The sky was vast and filled with stars, the kind of sharp, bright stars you only see on a crisp winter night. They looked honest. They were not trying to be anything other than what they were. I sat there for a long time, just breathing. I did not know what the future held. I did not know if Samantha would ever truly come around, or if she would stay angry about the Dichuk. I did not know if the fragile new understanding I had reached with David would hold, or if we would slowly slide back into those old, comfortable, bad habits. But as I watched the moonlight hit the frost on the lawn, I realized something important. I was no longer afraid of the answer. For so many years, I thought that being a mother and a grandmother meant being a bridge. I thought I had to be the structure that everyone else walked across to get where they wanted to go. I thought that if I stopped being that bridge, I would be left alone in the dark. But tonight, I finally understood the truth. I am not a bridge. I am the destination. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from my niece, Sarah, in Portland. It said, "Aunt Martha, I am just thinking of you tonight. I hope you know you can call me any time. Even if it is 3 a.m. I smiled at the glowing screen. A single tear escaped and ran down my cheek. But it was not a tear of grief. It was a tear of pure, sweet relief. I typed back a simple message. "Thank you, Sarah. I am feeling more like myself than I have in a very long time." I looked at the forest green shutters George had painted. I looked at the garden beds waiting for the first sign of spring. This life is mine. The reading room is mine. The quiet Tuesday mornings are mine. The peace I have built from the pieces of my grief is mine. I have spent 67 years being what everyone else needed me to be. I was the teacher. I was the wife. I was the mother. I was the safety net. But tonight, in this moment, I am just Martha. I am not a convenience. I am not a soft place for someone else's crisis to land. I am not a bank account to be drawn from when things get tight. I am a woman of worth. I am home, at last, in my own life. If this story touched something deep inside you, I want you to know that you are not alone. It is never too late to draw a line in the sand. It is never too late to stand up and say, "I matter too." Please, leave a comment and share your thoughts if you have ever had to choose your own peace. Thank you for listening to my story. Until next time, take care of yourself and remember your own value.